All right, let's get real honest in the room for a moment. How many of you ever failed an assignment in school? How many of you ever failed a test in school? You don't have to raise your hand on this one unless you just really would like to. How many of you just straight up failed the class? A lot of honest folks in here. When I was in college, I was taking a class called Old Testament Survey. Now, the Old Testament, it's got a lot of books in that thing. There's a lot of names. There's a lot of dates. There's a lot of location and kings and kingdoms and different things. There's a lot of stuff going on. And I was in this class, and it was the beginning of the semester. I took the first test, and I did really well. I got an A on it. And then the second test came around, and in anticipation of this, I thought, well, I did really good on the first one. So like what I did before is going to be enough this time. So, I went with the flow. Now let me rewind the story just a little bit. My professor of this class, his name was William C. Williams. William C. Williams, okay? If you were to look in the NIV, the New International Version Bible, he is one of the Hebrew translators in the NIV. That's how well this person knew the Old Testament. And so there was a lot going on in this class. Anyways, I get the second test back. And to my surprise, I got an F. I was shocked. In fact, it was one of those like, there has to be a mistake. You ever had an experience? This cannot be mine. Whose test did you give me? You checked the name, like, no, this wasn't mine. But sure enough, it was mine. I had earned that F. So then you start to get into anger, right? How did this happen? I studied. I studied. I just didn't show up and try to, wing it. No, I studied for this thing, and I still got an F. Then after that kind of trickled through my brain for a little bit, then the doubt starts setting in. Like, maybe this whole being a pastor and like studying the Bible thing isn't really what I'm supposed to do. I mean, I can't even pass a test on the Old Testament. And so you have to kind of go through these steps, these processes. And when you have a failure in life, you might become angry. You might become frustrated. You might begin to doubt if you're ever going to make it. In life, you're never going to succeed at everything. There's going to be moments where you fail. If you don't fail at something in life, then you're not human. We all fail at something. You're never going to get 100% on every single test, every single class, every single thing that you are never going to do it. You may fail at being a good friend. Maybe you have let some friends kind of slip through the cracks, or you weren't there for them in the moments of need that they had. Maybe you have failed at your job. Maybe you've been struggling with the workload, or maybe you're not understanding, the tasks and things that you're supposed to do, or maybe you have no clue how to do it whatsoever, but you're afraid to ask for help because you don't want them to think, well, what do I have you here for? You see, we all fail at things in life. Maybe some of you have failed at trying to start a business. You try to start something, you got your little side hustle, hoping that it turns into something good, and it just isn't working, and you're trying over and over again. Maybe you're here today and you feel like you have failed in a relationship. You failed in your marriage. Maybe you don't feel like you've been a good spouse, or maybe you don't feel like you've been a good parent. Whether you are a follower of Jesus or not, you're never going to be perfect in life. You are going to make mistakes and you are going to fail. But what do we do when we fail? We're starting a new series today, and it's called On the Edge of Greatness. On the Edge of Greatness. Here's the big idea today. On the other side of failure is where greatness resides. On the other side of failure is where greatness resides. Today, we're going to look at a man in the Bible who I love. Here's the reason I love him. He is a major screw up. Do any of you, you feel better about yourself when you look at somebody else's life and you go, well, at least I'm not as bad as that person. At least I didn't screw up and if you don't, you all do it. We all do it, right? This particular person, they blew it on monumental levels. But here's also what I love about this person. They didn't let the failure stop them. They didn't let the failure stop them. Let me introduce you to Peter. Peter is a disciple of Christ. Now, before he became a disciple, he was a fisherman. He had a fishing business. That means that he spent his time out on a boat in the sunshine or in the rain or the wind, whatever was happening. He was throwing the net in the water, trying to catch fish. He was fixing the nets when they would tear. He was doing this. Peter is a rough and tough man. Now, if you've read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you will read about Peter and you kind of get this, just take of Peter that he is probably somebody that's impulsive. He's probably somebody that has a lot of emotions and just kind of, exactly what he's feeling, exactly what he's thinking in the moment. He just lets everybody know. He had a temper. He was the type of person that would put his foot in his mouth a lot. He would say things probably without thinking that all the way through. Jesus calls on Peter to be a disciple. And inside those 12 disciples, there was another group. We'll call them the inner three. And Peter was also a part of the inner three. Peter, this failed, flawed human being, was a part of the closest people to Jesus. Now, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 26, starting verse 31. Let me just set this story up. Jesus is preparing to go to the cross. He's having the Passover meal, communion, which we will do at the end of service today, with his disciples. So he's talking to them. He's telling them the things that are going to be coming in his life. But he also says something that rocks them to their core. He tells them, you are all going to fall away from me. Let's see what happens. Matthew 26, verse 31. Then Jesus told them, this very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. So imagine this. Jesus is with the closest people to him. They're learning about him. They've been eating with him. They've been traveling all over with him. For 3 years, they've been taking part of miracles with Jesus. They are the closest people to Jesus. And then Jesus tells them as they're having a meal together that, hey, just so you know, you're all going to fall away from me. And they're like, huh? What? Any of you ever been told you're going to fail before? That's not a good feeling to have. But Jesus literally tells them, you're going to fall away from me. But in verse 32, he says this, after I have risen, he has let them know, after I have risen, I will meet you in Galilee. Verse 33. Again, Peter's the person who puts his foot in his mouth. He often says things without thinking it through. And Peter replies, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. You ever make a big, bold statement? Even if all these other scumbags fall away from you, not I, because I'm the real deal, Jesus. It's ride or die, baby. We're going all the way. Verse 34. Truly, I tell you, Jesus answered, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. I mean, Jesus just called Peter out. Tells him, you're going to deny me this very night 3 times. Now, typically when somebody tells us we're gonna fail, we kind of respond in anger or defensiveness or different things like this. And no, that's never gonna happen. Jesus tells him 3 times before the rooster crows, you are going to deny me. And then Peter doubles down, and look what he says in verse 35. Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And then all the other disciples are like, yeah, me too, us too. Yeah, we're never gonna go away from you, Lord. You are our Savior. Like, they all say, we're never gonna flee from you. Now let's fast forward the story. There was another disciple who was also at this meal. His name was Judas. And he betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. So what happens is they go to a garden, and then soldiers come. They take Jesus away, and they take him to a court. In the process of this, Jesus being taken by these soldiers, all the disciples fled away. They have all fallen away. Verse 69, we're jumping way down now. Jesus has been taken, he's being questioned, all these things are happening to him, he's being beaten, all these different things, but Peter stays in proximity to where Jesus is, even though he already fled in fear. Verse 69. Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. You also were with Jesus of Galilee, she said. Now, the servant girl in the Greek, this literally means like she is a girl. She is a young, like child. She is a servant of one of the court officials, and she comes out and she knows that who's inside is Jesus, and she sees this guy and looking at him and going, you're one of his. And this is what he says in 70. But he denied it before them all. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Now listen, he just didn't pull her aside and be like, oh, sweetie, you're mistaken. No, he said it so loud that everybody around them in that courtyard heard. I don't know him. Verse 71. Then he went out to the gateway where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, this fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth. He denies it again, and this time with an oath. I don't know the man. He was one of the closest 3 people to Jesus, and he denies even knowing him. After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away. Any of you got an accent? I've been told that I have a Texas accent, even though I'm not from Texas whatsoever. But that's just my Bakersfield heritage, I guess. So, but they say your accent is giving you away. Then this is what he said, verse 74. Then he begins to call down curses, and he swore to them, I don't know the man. Immediately, a rooster crows. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and he wept bitterly. Peter, one of the closest people to Jesus, denies him 3 times in one night. Then the rooster crows and he remembers what Jesus had said. He runs outside, crying and weeping. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation in your life where you are going through something so hard, or you feel like you have failed over and over and over again. And because of that, there's this emotional turmoil that just takes over, and you like literally have to remove yourself to go somewhere else. And you just may be bawling. You may be weeping before the Lord. You may just be screaming, whatever it is, whatever emotion that you have to get out because you feel like you have failed. Peter just spent 3 years with Jesus. Peter just told him that very night, even if I have to die with you, I won't leave you. Now, what if the story ended there? What if we never hear of Peter again? What if he just decides like, that's the end of it for me. I really screwed up. I'm out. Here's an interesting study that you could do. I don't have time to go into it today. But there was two guys that night. One, Judas, who goes out, sells Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. You should study what happens to Judas afterwards. He doesn't turn back to Jesus. He allows his failure to be final in his life. But Peter, even though he failed, he did stay close to where Jesus was. A failure doesn't mean the story has to end. My first point to you today is this: don't let failure stop you. Don't let failure stop you. Proverbs 24:16 says this: the godly may trip 7 times, but they will get up again. But one disaster is enough to overthrow the wicked. Here's what happens oftentimes in our lives when we fail at something. We allow one failure, one defeat to become final. One failure does not mean the end of the world for you. Never confuse a single defeat with a final defeat. Get back up again. Don't ever confuse the single defeat for a final defeat. Any of you ever heard of a man by the name of Dr. Seuss? He's written lots of children's books. Did you know when he was trying to get his first children's book published, he was rejected by 27 publishing companies? 27. What if he would have stopped? What if he would have stopped after number 1 or number 2, number 10, number 20? Then these beloved books that we all have read and grown up on, we wouldn't have. There was also another guy by the name of Walt Disney. Maybe you heard of him. Do you know that before he had made Mickey Mouse and all of these things that led to Disneyland and Disney World and all of that, do you know that he worked at a newspaper and he was fired because they said he lacked imagination? I'm a sports guy and I grew up in the 90s. So Michael Jordan is my basketball player. He won 6 NBA championships. But before he was that amazing success, do you know that he got cut from his high school basketball team as a freshman? Listen to what he says. I have missed over 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. On 26 occasions, I have been entrusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. I have failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Maybe you heard of this other guy. His name is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, this little guy. Do you know that he played college football and he failed to make it to the NFL? Right after he failed to make it to the NFL, he thought, okay, well, I'll go try out for the Canadian Football League. He was only on the squad for 2 months before he got cut. Now, the failure could have been final for him. He calls up his dad and talks to his dad. And if you don't know who his dad was a wrestler, professional wrestler. And he says, Dad, I think I'm going to go into the family business. And he launches into a career in wrestling and then launches into the movie industry. His failures all led up to him becoming who he was. Sometimes in life, we just see the success of other people, but we haven't seen the failures that got them there. The ways that they've grown, the ways that they've changed, the ways that they've developed as they have failed. Thomas Edison says this: many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. This is what happens. People are on the edge of greatness, but they have a failure, they have a setback, they have an obstacle, and instead of persevering and pushing forward and growing through it, they allow the failure to push them back, and they never get to the greatness. Point number 2 is this: allow your failure to help you grow. Allow your failure to help you grow. James 1, verse 2 says this: dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. God can grow you through your failures. You're like, well, I got some pretty bad ones. He can grow you through them. He can weave those failures into your testimony. He can weave those things into your story. The failure does not have to be final. In James, it says, these things, they help us to grow. We grow through our failures because there's opportunity. And when we go through the opportunities to grow, what happens? We build up endurance. We build up strength. It points us back to God, and we get our strength from Him, and we keep going forward. But here's what happens. Too many of us, when we fail in life, we get discouraged and we just quit. Don't disqualify yourself, because God takes ordinary men and women and does extraordinary things through them. Maybe some of you in this room today, maybe you're feeling a failure as a husband or a failure as a father. Maybe you're here and you feel a failure as a mom or a failure as a wife. Maybe there's reasons for it. Maybe you didn't have an example growing up in your life, and now you're trying to do something that you've never even seen modeled for you. Maybe you have a temper. Maybe there's been issues. Maybe there's been trust that's been broken, whatever it is, but you feel like you are failing in this area of your life. And so what happens is you begin to disqualify yourself. I'm not going to be able to get through this. I'm not going to be able to grow through this. For some of you in this place today, maybe you feel like you failed financially. Maybe you're buried in debt. Maybe you've had crazy bills come along that you just had no idea were coming, and it just wiped you out, and you had to go deep into debt. Maybe you just made some bad choices along the way. You bought some stuff that you really couldn't afford or make the payments on, and now you are buried in debt. Maybe you feel like a failure as a business person. Maybe you feel like you're a failure as a Christian. Like, I'm supposed to be a follower of Christ, but I don't really ever pray. I don't really, read my Bible. I don't really spend time with God. I kind of go to church like a couple times a year. Maybe you feel a failure in that way. We all feel like we failed in some areas of our life. But what are we going to do? Are we going to quit, or are we going to grow? The next point is this: when you fail, seek God, follow His path. When you fail, seek God, follow His path. Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6 says it this way: trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek His will in all you do, and He will show you which path to take. This is saying to trust God. Now it says, do not depend on your own understanding. That word depend, it means to like lean. We don't lean on our own understanding. So when you feel like you have failed in an area of your life and you begin to make a choice, do I lean away from God or do I lean into God? That's where most people go wrong. They lean away from God rather than leaning into God. And as they go and lean into God, then what do you do next? You seek His will for your life. And then He will show you which path to take. Success is on the same path as failure. Success is just further down the road. Most people don't reach success because they don't want to go through the failures that get you there. Are you willing to go through those things? Are you willing to grow? Are you willing to go through the pain? Are you willing to make the transformation, do the things that you need to do? I started today talking about failing a test in college. So as I failed this test in college, I had a choice to make. Well, do I just give up? Do I try to get out of this class? This class is too hard for me. There goes my pastor career. Can't do this anymore. Or do I try to grow through it? I learned every studying technique that you potentially could learn. I was writing on, 3x5 note cards, writing, in like 3-point font, writing out all the details, all the main things that you should be studying, having people quiz me on different things. Studying for like 3 hours a day leading up to this test. Just like, I'm going to try harder. 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 And then when I get to the test, I got an A. Here's what happens in life. Do we allow the failures to make us stop and quit, or do we allow the failure to push us to become better, to become stronger, to grow, to develop better habits? We'll learn from our mistakes, strategize, look for different ideas, learn how to be better prepared. You might need to do that by finding a mentor in your life in a particular area. It could be something as like, man, you are terrible with money. Maybe you need to find a mentor to help you, to sit down and show you, hey, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. Yeah, you're living way beyond what you are actually making. You got to make some cuts, or you got to get a second job, third job to make it happen. Maybe you need a mentor in your marriage, somebody to speak life, somebody to speak truth, somebody to talk you through those moments of failures that you've had. And that if you'll stay on the path, you can get to success. You're on the edge of greatness, but don't stop now. Winston Churchill said it this way: success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Do you have courage to continue? Do you have courage to take steps forward in your life? The big idea: on the other side of failure is where greatness resides. On the other side of failure is where greatness resides. So are you willing to walk through the failures to get to the other side? Now, I started this story off by telling you about Peter, who just blew it. Peter was one of the first to see Jesus resurrected. Peter was also one of the first to experience the power of the Holy Spirit. And what we refer to as Pentecost, he was in this room with others, and the power of the Lord fell upon them in such a way that it had never fallen before. They all began to speak in different languages, and the people outside of the room in the city began hearing these languages coming to them, going, what is going on? How are these people speaking these languages they've never learned? Peter steps up. Scriptures say that he stands up. the same one that denied Christ 3 times, he stands up and he preaches the gospel to them. He preaches the message of Jesus. And thousands of people gave their heart to the Lord that day. Now, what if Peter had let that failure that he had experienced be final in his life? Thousands would have missed out that day. And the story doesn't stop there. Peter, who's referred to as the rock, is what the church was built upon. So as we have this rock that the church has been established on, he was one of the earliest teachers and preachers and traveling and telling people about the Lord, and he wrote 2 of the books of the Bible that we study. But he was a failure. So are your failures gonna hold you back? Or are your failures gonna push you into your destiny?